The sort of flavour I wanted for this evening was really to acknowledge and showcase some amazing Tasmanian people. One of the people who was really inspirational early on was Tim Coy. And I got to discover some things that worked and helped him, and he's very kindly allowed me to tell his story in this book, and I'm going to touch on a few really important points of that. And this is about paying attention to our signals. Tim was one of those frontline professionals who went past the point of burnout, and we have, I'm very grateful for Tim's permission to share his story, and since his story, he's been a very, very strong advocate for resilience and looking after yourself. I'm going to share a little bit of his story in here. If you think of an emotion a bit like a signal, it's like if you're at home in a quiet room, there's no need for full volume to hear music. If you're on a subway in rush hour, you might need to turn it up. And states or signals, emotions in other words, are similar. Hypervigilance is an example of the volume being turned up too high. It is a common situation in law enforcement, very common in correctional services and police. Well, we provide, with permission, Tim's story here. Tim spent more than a decade in Tasmania's Risdon Prison, managing inmates in the maximum security unit. In 2009, a riot broke out. He operated above his full capacity for more than 9 hours, and he burned out after a protracted history even prior to that. And over the subsequent days, he fell in a heap. Tim spent many months off work with severe ill health. At one point, Tim told me, his wife joked to him, "Don't you dare commit suicide or I'll kill you myself." As he worked through his trauma and started the recovery process, we identified that he was living in an extreme state of hypervigilance. Even when sitting in a coffee shop, he would keep his back to the wall, scanning the room and watching the entrance, constantly expecting the worst. On the risk line, regardless of context, he was constantly vigilant at an 8 out of 10 intensity. By training him to develop a nuanced understanding of the felt sensations in his body, he was able to dial down hypervigilance to appropriate vigilance. So when he was in the coffee shop, where the risk was 3 rather than an 8, he learned to reduce the intensity of his state to 3 out of 10 vigilance to match the risk of the context. Some contexts were less and some were more, especially where there was a high chance of meeting inmates he had previously managed who were now roaming free in the community. By helping him understand the intention for vigilance, he was able to recalibrate his state to better match the shifting context of threat. Simply numbing hypervigilance, for example by medication, would have left him vulnerable to the very real risks. Tim returned to work, and after a short period he was promoted to a supervisory position. He later transitioned into a role as wellbeing officer and established a peer support program for correctional officers that's still thriving today. So this pattern of hypervigilance is a common one for law enforcement. Far too many of them overdo the protective state, and the result is burnout and problems managing relationships with family and friends. This doesn't mean to say that they should have the same kind of vigilance as, say, a school teacher or an accountant. Their roles demand vigilance, and it needs to be context appropriate. Attempting to remove vigilance and return experienced law enforcement or correctional staff to the population normal is doomed to failure and potentially exposes them to harm. So our message here is always respect the positive intention for the signal, even if there is some degree of discomfort or pain. I wanted to showcase Tim's amazing recovery and the incredible work that he did to recover, but also his really strong advocacy now for resilience and supporting systemic change within the prison environment, and the work that he's done to create and foster the MATES program. And I'd like to give Tim a book. Come on up, Tim.